Welcome to the Indie Film Hustle Podcast, episode number 246. Mere color can speak to the soul in 1,000 different ways. Oscar Wilde.
Broadcasting from the back alley in Hollywood, it's the Indie Film Hustle Podcast, where we show you how to survive and thrive as an indie filmmaker in the jungles of the film biz. And here's your host, Alex Ferrari.
Welcome, my Indie Film Hustlers, to another episode of the Indie Film Hustle Podcast. I am your humble host, Alex Ferrari. Today's episode is brought to you by Black Box. Black Box is a new platform and community that is all about financial freedom for filmmakers like you. If you join Black Box, you will be transformed from being a worker to being a maker of your own content. And you'll be making steady passive income from the global market. Black Box currently allows you to upload your stock footage once, get it to many global agencies, and then allows you to share that passive income stream with your collaborators. Whether you want to submit old footage that's been sitting around in your hard drives or create brand new content, Black Box is for you. It's really quite revolutionary. With Black Box, filmmakers can concentrate on making great content while Black Box takes care of all the business BS. Just visit www.blackbox.global to find out more. Color is by far one of the most important elements in the visual frame when you are filmmaking. You know, what would Carrie be without those bright, ridiculous reds? Or Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And the color palettes that Deakins used in that film for the Coen brothers. Color is so powerful, and it can show emotions and tell stories without even saying a single word. Color is really overlooked, and I'm not just talking about color on in color grading, but also on set, in production design, in wardrobe. Those movies that really do the full Monty, if you will, and go all out, you can tell. I mean, you look at The Matrix and look at the color palettes they used on that, or Amelie, and look at the color palettes used on that, Dark Knight, any Christopher Nolan movie, any David Fincher film, any Kubrick film, for God's sakes. They use color to the utmost, and it is so, so powerful. So today's guest is Ollie Kenchington, and he is a colorist, a filmmaker, and an editor. And he is kind of the color master. He created a new course called Directing Color, where he breaks down how to use color, but not only in post, but on set, how to think about color, how to have a color-first approach when shooting your films, and how that, just by doing that, will set your films apart from everybody else's. So please enjoy my conversation with Ollie Kenchington. I'd like to welcome to the show Ollie Kenchington, man. Thank you so much for taking the time out and jumping on the podcast.
It's my absolute pleasure, Alex. It's lovely to speak to you.
And, this is a topic, that we have not covered on the show before, and it is so important and it's so powerful. And I know a lot of independent filmmakers just don't understand color, not only the color grading process, but specifically the theory behind color. So I'm really looking forward to jumping into it with you.
Yeah, lovely. Fantastic. I could talk all day about this, so go for it.
Okay, so how did you first get into the business?
Color, or just generally filmmaking?
You as a filmmaker, yes.
Me as a filmmaker. So I studied, if I go way back, which really does kind of sow the seeds for where I am right now, I studied astronomy, art and photography at college, which is an unusual mix. And I really didn't know why I was studying that combination of courses back then. It only kind of dawned on me much later on that perhaps I quite enjoyed science and art. And that's kind of ultimately what led me into colouring. And it seems to me one of the best kind of disciplines for marrying art and science, and the technical with the creative. And I had picked up, as I say, stills cameras first of all, but really quite quickly moved into video. I was only doing sort of stills for a couple of years before I got hold of a big SVHS, big shoulder-mounted beast, top of the line back then.
SVHS was the shit.
Oh
back
yeah,
then.
man. Yeah, absolutely. And I was working with that for a little while, and this was. So I started my degree in 2000. So my degree was a kind of a mixed. It was actually an art degree, but it was very open. So I basically, of my own volition, made it focused on photography and film. And my final show was a mixture of the two, and I really kind of enjoyed flitting between the two, and obviously it's such a cross discipline. But with what film opened up for me was the ability to obviously tell that narrative, to actually string that story out in a linear fashion, and as it really was then, linear, tape to tape. But I was sort of doing it at the time where the cusp of mini DV was just starting to get entrenched. And I remember one day turning up, and the SVHS camera was sort of still in the cupboard, and in its place was this Canon XM1.
Oh, yes.
My university couldn't afford an XL one.
I was about to say.
Yeah, much to my annoyance. It was only an art school after all, but they had an XM one. The camera itself didn't really excite me at the time. I've got more excited about cameras in more recent years. But at the time, what excited me was the fact that I could take that footage straight into the Power Max that we were using back then, and be editing in only real time, ingesting that and starting to edit it digitally on the computer straight away. What felt like straight away anyway, was what opened up the floodgates for me. And a lecturer of mine managed to get me a hooky copy of Final Cut Pro. I think it was version 2, actually. It wasn't. I think version 2 had just come out, and that was that. So it's kind of all these things were happening simultaneously, and that was the kind of the opening of the post door for me. I then used all of my student loan to buy an iMac DV Snow, which was the. Oh yeah, had FireWire on it. That was
FireWire
was the thing.
400.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Smoking.
And I'm like, what more do you need? An iMac and a DV capable camera, and I was away. So I literally just kind of hid away for the next 3 years of my degree, just teaching myself how to edit with Final Cut Pro and making all kinds of weird. I've still got a lot of them, and every now and again I watch them just to make myself chuckle. But some very odd art films.
We all have them, man. We all have them.
Yeah. Oh my God. Some of those were classic, and but it kind of, so it all came from that. There was a bit of a hiccup along the way because I needed money, and
what a shock.
I quickly realized that making art films was never ever going to make me a single penny. Sure. So I fell into a job working for Apple, literally straight after I graduated.
Not bad.
And it wasn't at the time. It seems odd now, but at the time, Apple didn't really exist in the UK in a kind of a bricks and mortar sense. They relied on this massive network of third party, what they call Apple premium resellers, which I think they have in the States as well.
Sure.
They still kind of exist in this country, although they've been kind of reduced in number by the fact that obviously Apple now have these massive Apple stores everywhere. But yeah, it was a tiny little Apple premium reseller in the southwest of the UK, and they really liked the fact that I knew Final Cut Pro and the Pro Video apps, and I worked with them for about 3 years and supported a lot of post houses in the local area with setting up, Xans and getting the Pro Apps system installed.
You're geeking out, man. You're geeking out hard. I love it.
I know it was a crazy time. I mean, we were talking about this before you started recording, but we come from a similar kind of period of time with this. It seems crazy now. People kind of like who are in their early 20s, like, oh God, yeah, do you remember when Apple were tiny? And like, no, you don't understand. Yeah, in the early 2000s, this company was basically dead.
It was bankrupt. It was almost bankrupt. Yeah. Absolutely. I remember $7 a share for Apple.
Yeah.
I remember $7 a share.
Did you buy them though?
Of course not. Why in God's green earth would I have bought it?
Yeah, no, that would be a whole different story.
Yes, absolutely. Now, when did you get into color grading, where you found a home in color grading as well, or added it to your tools or your arsenal of things that you can do?
Well, the first time that I actually got hold of some color grading software and it became accessible to me as a mere human being was when Apple brought out Color.
Yeah, of course.
So that was the first kind of hands-on. But actually, the first time that I decided that I wanted to be a colorist was actually a couple of years, well, quite a few years before that. I was watching the bonus DVD of the Fellowship of the Ring, and there was a little piece on there, which is only a short little bit with Peter Doyle, talking to him about how he color graded the film, and I was watching it. I was like, "What's color grading?" I literally had no idea. I'd never heard of it. I'd never. Kind of contemplated that there was even such a need. Surely this stuff came out the camera looking like this,
Right.
And I'm watching it, and I remember it so vividly. There's this bit where you hear him in voiceover talking about them grading Legolas in the Mines of Moria, and we see Legolas up on, I think he's on like one of the graves, one of the kind of tombs, and he kind of jumps off, and they're grading his eyes to make them look more kind of blue because he's an elf and they're kind of magical. So yeah, and I'm like, oh wow, that's amazing. And then he hits the track button and it tracks his eyeballs as he jumps down. And I was like a lot of people even today, when they see demonstrations of tracking in Resolve, it's like my mind was absolutely blown. To the point where I kind of stalked Peter Doyle online, and I managed to find an email address for him, and I sent him an email saying, I just want to be a colorist now since I've watched this. How do I become a colorist? And the guy wrote back to me and he's like, well, we're going to be grading Return of the King soon. Why don't you be my assistant?
Oh, son of a... That's amazing.
This story is, I've told this story several times over the years, and it never gets any less painful. So I'm like, of course, yes, that's amazing.
But he's in New Zealand, right?
He's in New Zealand, so he's like, yeah, we're coming up. And I'm like, well, I'm in my last year of my degree, and I've got my degree to finish. She's like, well, that's cool. That'll line up really well with the timing. So I was like, oh my god, this is perfect. And it got kind of a couple of months down the line, and his emails were becoming increasingly kind of agitated. Like, have you sorted out accommodation yet? And we've got to book flights, And I was like, dude, chill out. We've got months until I finish my degree. And he was like, what are you talking about? Surely don't you finish in December like we do in New Zealand? I was like, no, our academic year ends in June, and we were like talking at cross purposes for months. And he's like, we'll be finished in June. You've either got to just forget your degree and come over, or we're just this isn't gonna happen. And
please don't say it. Don't say.
I know you know where it's going.
Oh God, Ollie. Oh my God.
I decided to finish my. Let me just remind you, my art degree.
Oh, son of a. Oh.
It's not like I was training to be a doctor, and
right, like you were like you were right before you got to the last. Oh my God!
Yeah,
no. Wait, did you not have anyone around to slap you? There's no one.
No one. I honestly, no one around me had any idea. I was literally the only person that I knew that even knew that color grading existed, who Peter Doyle was.
So what happened when you told Peter Doyle, yeah, thanks for the assistant job, but I'm going to finish my art degree instead?
Yeah, buddy.
And by the way, the Oscar-winning third part of the Lord of the Ring trilogy.
Yeah. This story gets worse, by the way. I just warn you. So I said, I'm going to choose to stick my degree. And bless him, he was really supportive. He was like, look, I totally get it. I think maybe he mistakenly thought I was doing a worthwhile degree. But he's like, I get it. You finish your studies. Maybe we can work on something in the future. Anyway, fast forward a year, and I get this email out of the blue. Now, as I said, I wasn't joking when I said I fell straight into a job with Apple after I graduated. It was literally 2 weeks after my graduation ceremony. I'm now working for Apple, and about 6 months further down the line, I think I'd already been promoted once. It was such a massive point in time where Apple were changing and expanding so quickly. It was I was absolutely caught up in it. Anyway, I get this email out the blue from him saying, Ollie, I'm coming to the UK. This is perfect. I still need an assistant. I ended up not having one on Return of the King. I definitely need one now. I've got a big project coming up in London. Will you join me?
Now, son of a. I'm sorry. It's just, it's so painful. It's so painful.
This is lightning striking twice in the absolute purest sense of the term.
It never happens.
So as if the first time of saying no wasn't bad enough, this was 10 times worse, because by this point, I'm, what am I, 21, 22? I'm a little bit arrogant now because I've got a pretty damn good job working for Apple, I'll have you know.
Of course you are. You're 21, 22.
And so I sent him an email back saying, "Oh, I don't know. I got this really good job, and I didn't really want to move to London. I'm a bit of a country bumpkin. I live in the in the countryside in the southwest of the UK. I was like, I don't know if I want to move to London, to be honest. I mean, what film is it?" Which is like a classic, if you need to know the film, then just go away. And he would just write back again, really, really nice guy. He was just like, "Oh, look, do you know what? If it sounds like you're set. Yeah, don't worry about it. If you need to kind of know what the film is, it's probably not a good fit for you. And don't worry about it. Best of luck." And I was so arrogant, actually. I just like, yeah, okay. And I literally didn't think about it again for a number of years until I one day, I don't know why, I think I was listening to a podcast and he came on and he was talking about
this idiot
his career.
This idiot that turned me down twice.
It wasn't, thankfully, but he did mention his assistant a couple of times, who must have been the person he ultimately ended up hiring. Anyway, and it only dawned on me at that point that the film he was talking about was The Prisoner of Azkaban, and of course he went on to do all of the Harry Potter films after that, and countless other films that we could sit here and list all day. And so I turned down The Return of the King and the vast majority of the Harry Potter films, and that brings us to today.
Well. And that's the end of the show, guys. Thank you for listening.
Bye-bye.
It was.
I wouldn't blame you for not speaking to me now.
Wow, you know what? But look, I'm a big fan. I'm a big believer that things are supposed to happen the way they're supposed to happen, and you are where you're supposed to be. As beautiful as those opportunities might have been, it would be the equivalent of Steven Spielberg calling me up and saying, "I need an assistant to come and shadow me on a film I'm doing," and I say, "You know what? I'm just going to stay here in Orlando and finish my degree in film instead of going with you, Master Spielberg." It's the equivalent. It's the equivalent of something like that. Twice.
Exactly, twice.
The twice thing is what really gets me, because the first one I could say, you know what?
Exactly.
Fine, but the second one,
I should start telling the story and leaving out the second part because it's good enough on its own, isn't it?
The first one's painful, but there's some part of you like, you know what? There's a little bit of honor in trying to finish up what you started, and I get all that. Yeah. But you're working.
No, that goes, doesn't it? You carry on with that story, and it's like, this guy's a dick.
I can't believe. And then, but I think what helps you is that. It wasn't like it's someone that it's in the behind the scenes. It's like, it's a guy who people don't know off the street. Yeah.
Do you know what?
But they know the movies.
I mean, anyone who knows. I went to the Harry Potter, the Warner Brothers studio tour for Harry Potter, which is
down the street from me.
In Leavesden, in just outside London. And
you have one in London as well. There's one here in LA.
Yeah, and I think I was first.
Obviously,
being the home of Harry Potter. Wow. I went there with my wife and my eldest child it was only a few months ago, actually. And the very last part, after you've done the whole tour and you're blown away by all this stuff, the very last room you come to, everyone just walks through it and just keeps going. But I stopped and I saw this woman sat there, and I said, what's this room? What's this? The whole room was lined with boxes, and they're meant to be wand boxes, a bit like you're inside Ollivanders, and there's all these different wands, and they all have names on it. I was like, so what is this? And she said, it's every single person over the years that had anything to do with the Harry Potter franchise, cast, crew, everyone has a wand box with their name on it in this room. And because it's only like a couple of inches by an inch, these boxes are quite small, that it's only a relatively small room, and so many people just streaming through, and literally you're like, I'm at the end, you can see the exit, and off they go. And I'm like, so I start looking at all of them, and I know I walked over to her and said, do you know where Peter Doyle would be? And she's like, yeah. And she got out this massive binder. She's like, right. Anyway, she eventually finds him and points to his box, and I just, for a minute, I was like, in an alternate universe, in this room is a wand box with my name on it.
Yes.
And I'm not in that universe.
No.
And that's annoying.
Well,
But there you go.
anyway, I think we've beaten that horse to death.
Yeah, we have. Yeah, let's move on.
We've all made mistakes. Let's move on. So, so you got into color and you created this amazing course called Directing Color, which is one of the reasons why I want to have you on, and to kind of dig into color and how humans deal with color. Well, first of all, how do human beings perceive color in the first place?
Well, there's kind of two sides to it. There's the biological side of it. So literally, how does the human visual system work? How do we see color, and what are the differences between people and what are the similarities? But then there's also the kind of cultural side of it, and what what we in our various societies have come to accept as different meanings associated with the different colors. Mm-hmm. One of the thing that interests me most is, which I discuss in the course, is things like how we've evolved to pay less attention to certain colours and more attention to other colours, and how that affects our ability to kind of if you see these colours within a scene or a photograph or a painting or whatever it might be, how that can cause a distancing in some areas and things coming forward in others, and essentially a way of creating depth just simply by having certain colors in the image. And that for me, I think is fascinating. And we talk in the course about how we've evolved to become quite ignorant to blue, for example, because from an evolutionary point of view, there's absolutely no benefit in us being particularly receptive to different shades of blue. The sky is kind of almost becomes background noise. It's there all the time. We can't procreate with the sky, although some people may have tried at some point. some crazy people. And it's also not a threat to us. So those things. Can you eat it? Is it going to eat me? Can I procreate with it? That's the kind of stuff that drives biology and drives evolution. And the sky just doesn't play a part into that. It's also the rarest color in nature. There's very few animals that are
fruits,
blue.
Vegetables, yeah.
Exactly. So are the cones in our eyes that are responsible for being receptive to different frequencies of the spectrum. The ones that are responsible for looking at blues, there's only 1% of them. So 99% of our vision is looking at everything other than blue. And so that's why cool colors recede, and they don't physically recede. They, of course, they're in our perception. We're just ignoring them, so they've become less important to us. And if you look at the other side of that, which is, well, what colors come forwards? It's these warm colors, these oranges, these reds, all based around flesh, blood, things that, from an evolutionary point of view, are very important that we can distinguish, and the things that we can. Kind of our warnings to us, or we're a social animal, being able to kind of spot other people and interact with other people and dangers of your blood, and when you see it, that they all have these effects on us, and to the point where in some people that mechanism's a bit overkeyed, and my grandma used to faint if she ever saw blood, and it's actually quite a common thing, and that's actually that same mechanism just gone a bit haywire. That's how ingrained in it is that these things kind of can produce emotional responses in us and physical responses as well, like higher blood pressure and elevated heart rate when we see reds. It's a really interesting phenomenon.
Yeah. So how do different colors affect different emotions? Because I know, obviously, if you walk into a red room, it's a very different feeling than if you walk into a pink room or a green room or a yellow room. You have a different emotional attachment. So, and I know there is some theory, color theory, like, well, red is this and green means that, but it's also cultural as well. It doesn't go across the board. Oh yeah. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, red's a really good example because, of course, in China, red means such different things to what it means in Western culture, and so I think culture plays a massive part of that. But not just societal culture, but also the culture around how we consume entertainment. So which is far more kind of international. But going to the cinema and watching TV, there's a visual language that's established over a course of 100 years, which is a language that we're all fluent in, and it's a language that a lot of people, they can't articulate that they are fluent in that language, but it's there, and that's always been an interesting subject for me because, and also a dangerous subject because, of course, when you're new and in filmmaking, mistakes are not often forgiven very easily by your viewer because they are just so accustomed to watching high quality content and those established kind of visual cues and visual language that's there. And this is why people who don't go to film school have a bit more of a harder time because you can be a very intuitive shooter. You can have a natural eye for composition, but there are things that a film school will teach you about visual language and about how framing someone a certain way or using a certain kind of focal length of lens can affect people's perception of intention, or if there's kind of a malice or an opportunity or a threat or whatever it might be within a scene. And that's the kind of stuff that I didn't go to film school. That's the kind of stuff that I've had to slowly over the last kind of 20 years kind of get my head around, and it's taken longer than it would have done if I'd had that opportunity to go to a film school. But it's there, and it's a language that we're all fluent in, but you have to kind of tap into it and unlock it, to kind of, it's almost like a repressed memory. You got to kind of tap into that and pull it out and go, oh, right, that's why this feels a certain way. And color's definitely part of that.
There's some, I used to work when I first started out with an old time director, who had been doing it for years. And he told me something about color I never forgot. He goes, if you want your greens to pop, the shot before, make it red, because the red will stay in your eye when it jumps to the green and enhance the green in a way. And I thought that was fascinating. Can you kind of delve into that a little bit?
Yeah, so it's fatigue. So you can fatigue your cones. So the receptors in your eyes that are absorbing these frequencies. If they are overstimulated, or if you're looking at a certain color for too long, they become fatigued and they essentially weaken. And when they weaken, when you sort of look at something else, then that frequency is lessened. And it's, one of the basic tenets of color theory is the idea of complementary colors, and what sits opposite a color on the color wheel is its complementary color. So, for example, this often happens in the summer if you're sunbathing, or if you're out in the garden and you've got your eyes closed. There's so much of a particular wavelength of light that's filtering now through your eyelids, so that's tinting everything that light red. That when you then open your eyes, everything looks really green. And it's the same thing. You're fatiguing the red receptors in your eyes, or the cones that are looking at that frequency. And then when you then open them up or look at something else, you're then left with that as essentially a weak channel, which makes everything else look stronger. It's not that everything else has become stronger. It's that you've just lessened the response to a certain frequency, which makes everything else look stronger. So red and green, yellow and blue. And it really can work against you when you're color grading. And in fact, this happened to me recently with a grade where there was a series of shots and with an interview, and absolutely graded, skin tones looked perfect. But I think it was like the third or fourth time you cut back to this interview, the preceding shot was foliage. It was sunlight coming through some leaves. And it was on screen for maybe 5-6 seconds. And then when you look at the interview immediately afterwards, it looks like their skin is all over the place. And it looks like the colorist has done a terrible job here. But if you look at those interview shots in isolation, they look absolutely fine. And so you end up having to color grade that last interview shot actually differently and essentially deliberately wrong to counteract the sensation of someone having that green fatigue of their eyes when they then cut from that previous shot to the next shot. So it has massive implications on how people perceive your films, and a colorist needs to know this stuff because they need to kind of hopefully produce something that's consistent all the way through. And continuous contrast is another factor of this, and that is the phenomenon where surrounding colors around a particular color will alter the way that it looks. And again, that's something that you have to be really conscious of, particularly with interviews, with skin tones. What colors are you using as your backdrop? What colors are in the scene with your talent? Because they could be making skin tones look wrong when they're not, or they could be making bad skin tones look right. Which is another bad thing, of course.
Right.
So basically our eyes are constantly screwing with us, and the colorist needs to understand the human visual system and all of these optical effects, these tricks that our brains are playing on us, and this is why I said earlier I love the meeting of kind of science and art and sort of technology and creativity with color grading. For me, it ticks both those boxes, and people tend to be left hemisphere dominated kind of creative people, or right hemisphere dominated sort of technical or organizational people, and it's relatively rare to find people who are both, and they hop back and forth between those two kind of parts of their brain very happily. But for whatever reason, I am one of those people, and I do really like being able to play off a deep technical understanding of color and human biology and how cameras work, but also then the creative kind of implications and how that's woven into the creative art of filmmaking.
Now, how should a director use or know about color when designing his or her shots in a film? Because it's something really, I've seen some directors do it really well and some not so much.
Yeah, I guess the danger of this is that sometimes you can come away with conversations, and it's one of the fears with directing color was that people might come away from it thinking that, everything I've ever made is wrong because I never thought about this, and this. And I guess really this is like a layer of varnish on the top. It's the boat, if you like, or the chair or whatever underneath could be just as stable and just as sturdy and just as well crafted without that extra layer of lacquer. But is it going to win prizes? Is it going to be one that someone picks over something else? And I think that's the thing, is all of these techniques are things that are just kind of, they're honing it and refining it, and it's just an extra layer of gloss that will help make your product, your film, stand out above others. And one of the things that people can do is obviously focus on lighting. Other things people can do is focus on obviously, wardrobe or art direction, or there's various different parts of a film that one can kind of put energies and resources into, thinking that this is what will elevate my film. But the truth of it is that the things that win Oscars and the things that people talk about for years to come and smash box office records are the films that do all of those things. Yep. Every single element of that. And in directing color, I talk about Whiplash. And I think Whiplash is a fantastic example of a film where every single sort of aspect of filmmaking is brought together and thought about, and you end up with this result on screen that's so captivating. The camera movement, the lighting, or in the case of what I'm really interested in, the color, and the fact that certain colors are used to kind of signify emotions within the main character without you having to say it, without having to spoon feed the audience. So this is where it gets really exciting for directors, I think, because it's an additional weapon in their storytelling arsenal.
Well, yeah, it's kind of like the olden days, which was that language you were talking about that's been established for over 120 years, which is the black guy, the bad guy wears black and the good guy wears white. And that was in the silent days. That's the way it was. And it was established that way. And then if you know that, you can play on that, where then the bad guy could wear white and the good guy could wear black. And you see that constantly going back and forth, and you can start playing with it once you understand it. And it's extremely powerful. It's extremely
It really is. I think people think that it isn't because it's it's a kind of a subconscious thing. It's something that you're not, like, even as a colorist, I didn't go and see Whiplash the first time and come out thinking, oh, really interesting that they'd put that character in same green top that they'd put the dad's character in. And it's only once you kind of go back and digest and reanalyze these things that and often when you see stills of them in isolation, that you think, oh shit, yeah, they're doing this and they're doing that. I think that doesn't mean it's less valuable just because it's subconscious. It means it's more powerful. I think one of the very first sentences that you hear me say in the Directing Color series is 70% of all communication is nonverbal. And that's really, really important. The fact that you're not hearing it or you're not being spoon-fed it doesn't mean that it's less valuable. It means it's more valuable because we are more accustomed to those subconscious cues than we are verbal and obvious cues. So they should make up, at least 70% of your film. They should make up a big chunk of how you're communicating. You shouldn't feel like it's not worthwhile because it's not in the script or it's not, obviously up in your face in the scene.
If you look at a movie that we all have seen, Star Wars, Darth Vader is in black. If Darth Vader was wearing pink, completely different energy. Completely.
I think I've seen that version, actually.
Yes, I have, actually. I've been to a few Comic-Cons myself. But then you've got Luke, who's wearing white. You've got Han Solo, who's wearing black and white because he's a good guy and a bad guy. You've got Obi-Wan, who's wearing brown, which is an earthy color, which signifies wisdom. And then you got Yoda, who's green, which signifies knowledge and wisdom as well, if I'm not mistaken, that earthly color. And those are kind of certain cues that were associated with those colors, correct?
Yeah, well, particularly, green's an interesting one because, yes, it does. Certainly, if you look over a very broad kind of aggregate, kind of cultural perceptions of green, green has obviously all kinds of connections to do with the natural world, to do with serenity, to do with peace, and kind of like sprites, and there's loads of different kind of like Easter, for example. Obviously, Christianity kind of bent that towards its own purposes, but celebrations of spring and bringing green things into your home, and those things have gone on for millennia, and there's all kinds of positive associations with green. But at the same time, just because of I don't know what it is. Mainly because of skin tones. I think green is something that you don't often see as a color choice in many films because it clashes so terribly with skin tones, and it can become. Green also looks a little bit kind of, I don't know, kind of, it can very easily veer from kind of fresh spring green to a kind of a horrible kind of muddy green that just doesn't look good on screen.
Puke green.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, again, talking of Whiplash, in the very last episode of the Directing Colour series, I break down Whiplash, and green comes up because it's used quite heavily in scenes where Miles Teller, the main guy in the film, his character they want to show that his character is being kind of assaulted by these kind of outside pressures, and there's a really good scene at the beginning where he's walking back to his apartment, and as he's walking through the kind of communal areas, there's lots of loud noises and there's lots of kind of people, and they're not really doing anything wrong, but clearly he doesn't like this. It's ruining his focus, as it were, and the whole scene's a vivid green, and they're letting those colors leach into his skin tones, and it's used really effectively in that film to show toxicity and danger and this kind of sickness that which in that film is mainly kind of like a mental sickness more than anything else. And the fact that he does kind of have a breakdown, and ends up hurting himself to try and win the approval of his teacher, but then what they do is they place that exact same green in the wardrobe of the dad, and also the guy who's initially in the band, who he has to play better than in order to kind of win his place in the band, and so they both wear exactly the same coloured green shirt in that film. So green can be used actually, and is often used these days, as a kind of a bit of a sick kind of colour and a bit of a toxic kind of feel to it, which is a mental illness, which is an interesting kind of more modern slant on green. Well,
like institutional, like in a mental insane asylum, you're going to see green somewhere.
Yeah. In fact, interesting, I've just literally this morning, I've just delivered a project for the Natural History Museum in London, who I do a lot of work for. And I was colour grading a little piece that they've just done. They've got a show up at the moment called Venom, and it's all about different snakes from around the world and how venom is used in medicines in certain parts of the world and all kinds of stuff. And there's this little film, and I was just grading it for them, and I noticed they sent an offline reference that the editor had just done a sort of light grade on for me to see the kind of direction that they were heading in. But I was essentially grading it from scratch, but just referencing the offline. Sure. I noticed that whenever they cut to the B-roll of the snake, the snake's kind of shooting venom, or in cage, in like. Do they call them aquariums? The snakes live in aquariums.
They're in zoos here. They're in zoos.
Yeah, but like in the Natural History Museum, they have like them in glass sided.
Yeah, I forgot. Well, we call them
basically.
like, I don't even know what they call them here, but yeah, I know, like the
Anyway,
the Venom's pit. I don't know.
Yeah, whatever the hell it is. And I noticed that the editor had pushed quite a bit of green into those shots, and I was like, okay, I kind of see where they were going with this. But they'd also pushed it into the interviews, and clearly, and I had after having a chat with them, I could see where they were going. Obviously, the whole piece is about venom. They wanted to kind of feel like this kind of like dangerous thing. They've got these kind of slow-mo shots on the phantom flecks of snakes shooting venom out of their fangs. But it just felt so wrong with the interviews. So I ended up pulling it out of all of the interviews and just pushing it into specific scenes and blocks of B-roll where it kind of worked. And, so it's just a little gentle tint of green. And actually, I dialed it back quite a bit. I said to them that you don't need to force feed it to people. You don't need to kind of, it almost looked like a comic book the way they'd done it. And, it's just a subtle tint that you pick up on in the highlights and in the whites. And it does the job. It's telling you that this is a kind of a dangerous sort of toxic substance that they're dealing with.
Now, besides Whiplash, what are some other movies that really, or other directors who really use color to great effect?
Oh, it's well, I mean, actually, Peter Jackson is one of the ones that I think is does very clever things with color and color palettes. So I always remember sorry, carry on.
No. I hear the colorist is really good, but sorry, couldn't help it.
Yeah,
let's move on.
Yeah. Damn it. The Hobbit is really interesting. I really like the fact that in the Hobbit films, there's this color palette that's established, which is pushed into the kind of the leaf color. So there's a really, I think it was in one of the trailers. Sure. So a lot of people have probably seen it. There's a bit where Frodo, not Frodo, of course, it's Bilbo, isn't it, in that one? Bilbo climbs to the top of a tree to see where they are. They're like in a forest and they're lost. And he climbs to the top of a tree. And that scene where you see the whole of the sort of canopy, the top of the canopy of trees in this big forest, it's so subtle, but the colors are just pushed into a realm which doesn't mimic our reality. It doesn't mimic our world. And it does a really amazing job of making you feel like you're looking at a fantastical, almost alien landscape. And it's so subtle. It's just very slightly pushed into an area, into kind of magenta-y reds and kind of slightly more cyany greens than you would expect and that you would see in normal trees on Earth. And it's a really interesting use of color to kind of help with that sense of otherworldliness, but with familiar objects. And I think that's used really effectively. And Peter Jackson, I think in other films of his, does some really interesting things with contrast and with saturation. I can't remember who, the name escapes me right now, but I can't remember who directed Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, but that's another film that I often reference when I'm thinking about the use of color and it's how effective it is at storytelling, because that's an interesting one, because obviously it's a thriller, it's a whodunit. Mm-hmm. And it kind of comes back to what you're saying earlier about, if the baddie is always in black and the goodie's always in white, what if we play around with that? And Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy plays around with the idea of clarity and the idea of high contrast, because we have a measurable pleasure response when we see high contrast images. You can actually see, the readouts from, if you have all those probes on your brain, there's an increase in brain activity when we see high contrast images, and we find them more attractive because our brain finds it easier to tell if things are in or out of focus if they're high contrast. And of course, contrast plays a big part in autofocus systems in camera. So that edge contrast, that detail, that sharpness is pleasurable to watch. And you can see this evidenced in photography as well. If you walk down any kind of supermarket or anywhere where they're selling lots of magazines, you'll see they're all glossy covers. They're all high contrast. They're doing everything they can to make those pleasing high contrast images. And then you've got something like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, where what they want is for you to constantly feel like you don't know what's going on. It's a thriller where it's not until the very last scene that the reveal happens. And most thrillers kind of like to leave clues. They like to reward, like doggy treats for the viewer. Like, oh, look, notice that's happened. That's a film where they do everything they can to make sure that doesn't happen. They don't want you having any reason to suspect one person over another. So you go through the whole film wondering, is it Tinker Tailor Soldier or spy? And one of the ways that they enforce that is by making the whole thing incredibly low contrast. It's very grey in that film. And the colours are very muted, and it literally taps into a lack of clarity, or the viewer's never given the opportunity to have any clarity on who may have been the perpetrator or who may be this mole. And I think that's a really interesting use of contrast, though, as I say, I can't remember the director's name right now. But I think there's some great examples out there.
The two movies that come to mind always is Amelie, which was just stunningly done. Anything that Wes Anderson does, because Wes Anderson uses color to an extreme extent, and The Matrix with that look, absolutely. The Matrix look versus the real world look, and so, I mean, that look I'd never seen anything like The Matrix when it came out in '99. Like there was just, and it, by the way, ages so well. I mean, you can watch The Matrix right now, and it aged super well. But that look, which is that technology and sickly, like you're not well, like you're not supposed to be here kind of energy, as opposed to the real world, which is more vibrant. And well, none that depends on if you're in in Matrix 2, then you're in the rave, which was very vibrant in color. But like,
that's what I was going to say. I mean, you're absolutely right, and where those scenes change and those locations change, you can see the color developing with the plot. So as the films continue, the film, it's not a one-trick pony. They're really thinking about how color represents different locations and different, how they want. So you've got lots of browns and reds when they're in, Zion, and there's loads of tribal kind of music, and music and color. These are all things that are kind of helping drive that story forwards.
Have you ever seen the movie Speed Racer?
No, I don't think I have.
So it's the Wachowski brothers, same guys who directed The Matrix.
Right. Yeah.
Get it on Blu-ray if you can, and because it is easily the most colorful film I've ever seen in my life. And it is, if you remember the cartoon, they basically just took the cartoon, amped up all the color and saturation, and did but it's like, I think the reason why it's so, and I'd love for you to watch and hear what you think of it. I think one of the reasons it didn't do well, because it's actually a good movie, if you know what you're getting into. But the colors are so vibrant and so in your face that I think it was too much. I think it was. I see.
I've just quickly Googled it and done an image search on Google, which by the way is a massive top tip from me for anyone who's thinking of developing mood boards or planning color looks for their film. Just Google the name of a film or a picture or a photographer or a filmmaker or anyone, and just go to the image searches. I can't tell you what an effective way it is for very quickly digesting color palettes. A really good demonstration of this I always like, and your viewers, your listeners can try this out themselves, is to type, make sure they don't do this if they're of a sensitive disposition, but to type horror into Google and then just go to the image search. And it's fascinating what you find. What you find is essentially blacks, whites, and red. Pure primary red. Sure. It's almost, with the odd bit of sort of sick green thrown in. It's it's fascinating. It's a very good way to get a feel for the general color palettes and looks that are embedded in most films. So if I type in Speed Racer and go to an image search, which is what I did whilst you were talking, I can see exactly what you mean. Those vivid comic book blues and reds and sky blues, and there's a few stills of the film as well. But
to an extent that it's not even, I've never seen before. I don't think it has been. It was so intense, especially the Blu-ray. If you watch it on Blu-ray, it is it's so intense. But I'd love for you to watch it. It's a fascinating film, especially with color. Don't color grade anything after you watch it, though. Your eyes will be wiped for at least a day.
I was going to say, actually, on the topic of films where they really go for it with color. I mean, it's like, there's no subtlety involved really at all. Hugo is a classic one.
Oh, yes.
Scorsese goes to town with that, and the way it's embedded in the art direction, in the wardrobe, in the makeup, in everything.
Look at Fight Club.
Is amazing.
Look at Fight Club.
Yes, yeah.
Fight Club's
But I think that the important thing to remember in every single case, in every single one of those films we've just mentioned, is the color is serving the narrative.
Yes.
It's never there for its own sake. It's never there
to look pretty.
Exactly. Just to make things look pretty. If you want to make something just look pretty, keep it natural, keep skin tones looking normal, make it nice and glossy and high contrast, and add a little bit of golden light into it, and bish bash bosh. If you want to try something that serves the narrative and makes people feel a certain way and drives the story and in certain cases becomes even a character into its own right, then that's where color can be really powerful.
There's a scene in I just directed a new film, and there's a scene in it where and I colored it as well, where at the beginning they're at the bottom of the hill, and at the bottom of the hill it's all very colorful, but as they go up the hill, up these long flight of stairs that's almost an epic journey, it slowly cools all the way to the very top. They're nice, it's cooled, it's muted, and it's subtle. You won't, unless you're looking for it, you won't notice it. But it was done very purposefully, because then at that point of the journey, now it starts getting harder and harder, and they're not as happy as they were when they first got on the journey. So
it's a nice trick. It's a really nice. There's so many things that colorists can do. It's still so massively underappreciated by most people. Which is not in a "oh, you don't appreciate us" type way. Just in a
I don't even know you exist. I don't even know you exist kind of way.
I guess it's like the old saying, if you notice the editing, then the editor's done a bad job. It sometimes feels a bit like that, but I do feel like color grading is it's so much more part of people's general awareness now, at a much lower end of the kind of filmmaker spectrum, and that's because of the point of entry, the price point, and the accessibility of it through things like DaVinci Resolve Lite and cheaper hardware that can run programs that are operating in 32-bit float color spaces that just couldn't happen on laptops and desktop computers, and you have to go to workstations in the past, and that's opened up the floodgates in a sense, but that doesn't mean that they suddenly understands everything that we're talking about. These are things that come through study and through talking to colorists who've been doing it a long time, and research and experience and practice. And this is, I guess, why I think directing color is an important course. I mean, I would say this, I've made it, but I do think it's an important course.
So tell us a little bit about the course.
Well, it was born out of the fact that me and Scott, who runs MZ, we were chatting about the fact that there were no color grading courses on MZ at that time, and there's all lots of practical filmmaking courses, and there were some editing courses, but color didn't kind of get a look in. And I as a colorist thought that should be addressed, and he was like, fine, make us a course. And I was like, oh. Then it was like, okay, what do we do? And I guess the obvious thing is to make a straightforward color grading course. And there's a huge appetite for that, and we will be doing that, and we'll be really, going to town on that side of things and making, a big masterclass about color grading. But initially what I proposed to Scott was that we did something that was shorter and more kind of easily digestible, and kind of got the whole thing kind of conversation started around color, and then it was like, well, what do we choose? And the thing that kind of swung it for me was I run a film school, a training academy called Korro Academy, and we are a Blackmagic certified training partner, and I'm a Blackmagic certified trainer. So for years now, I've been teaching people DaVinci Resolve, I've been teaching people color grading, and probably the most common thing I get asked about is, from editors or directors or filmmakers, is I want to learn about color. Can you teach me DaVinci Resolve? And over the years, I kind of got sort of bored of saying to people, well, hang on, what do you want to do? Do you want to learn how to color, or do you want to learn how to operate DaVinci Resolve? And in their minds, there wasn't a separation between those two things. As far as they were concerned, I want to learn how to color grade, therefore teach me DaVinci Resolve. I was like, well, no, that's like saying I want to learn about the world and teach me how to drive. It's like you might only drive to the end of the road. That means you're never going to learn about the world. And it's kind of the same thing. So what I started to do, and I've been doing this for years, was I developed what I called a color theory course, but really it's it's not really. It makes it sound a bit dry, but directing color sounds much better. And essentially, it was a one-day course that I didn't insist, but I would say to people, look, I'd strongly recommend that if you've never color graded at all, you come on this color theory course first, and we talk about the why first. We talk about why you would want to do something. We break down films where this is done. We talk about chroma subsampling and how do you press individual of. How popular it turned out, it's one of our most popular courses. And so when it came to kind of deciding, well, what should we kind of pick to do as a shorter kind of 1 hour-ish course, to get the whole thing started with MZ, I thought, well, this seems like a good course, but it is a very dry course. So I had to kind of think of a format for how we could make that more accessible and also just more entertaining, because ultimately you're asking people to pay money to sit there and watch something for an hour.
Sure.
And I should really make something that people want to sit down and watch. And now that was where the idea came to basically piggyback on the back of a commercial that my film production company, Korro Films, was making. And so essentially killing two birds with one stone. We were kind of doing a behind the scenes of me shooting a commercial for these for a company, and then me sort of talking to the camera about why I was doing certain things and how we developed a color palette for that film. And then it's intercut with stuff where I'm sat at a grading suite and breaking down grades. And
it was great. It was great. I saw it, and it really is something that we as filmmakers need. And I don't think there is much out there about the theory, and especially it's done in a very entertaining way. It's very digestible, and you can get in and get out very quickly. And it's something that I think you'll become a better director after you watch it. And for everyone listening, I'll definitely put links to the course in the show notes as well.
Lovely. Thank
now,
you.
I'm going to ask you a few questions that I ask all my guests.
Okay.
So this is kind of like the lightning round. What advice would you give a filmmaker wanting to break into the business today?
Don't, whatever you do, turn down Peter Doyle twice.
When opportunity knocks and the horse is literally have a gift in its mouth, do not turn away. Okay, great advice. Can you tell me what book had the biggest impact on your life or career?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Well, as a colorist, I think one of the books that was instrumental and really helpful when I first went from I'm really interested in color, I'm playing with color, and to I'm now a professional colorist. And something that really helped me was the Colorist Handbook,
Great book.
which Alexis van Herkman is just the Don, and that book is just chock full of really useful information. I can't recommend it highly enough. That was a huge book for me. Okay. In terms of filmmaking, I did buy the Peter Jackson's autobiography, which talks about his starting out as a filmmaker and his career. It goes right from him, messing around making films as a small child.
Horror movies too, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very graphic horror movies, but very graphic ones, if I remember correctly.
If you're under 18, don't go and watch them straight away. Actually, they've aged quite badly. So
they were badly aged when he made them, sir. I think he would say the same thing.
Yeah. But I think that book was really interesting. I mean, any book, any biography or autobiography of filmmakers, I find really fascinating. I just think directors and filmmakers generally are most often in life very interesting people, and seeing how their careers developed, I think, is really, really fun and informative.
Cool. Now, what is the lesson that took you the longest to learn, whether in the film business or in life?
Learning to say no. Probably. Mm-hmm. I'm still quite bad at it. I sometimes feel kind of duty bound to do things for clients or do things for people who aren't even clients that really anyone else would be like, really? Why are you doing that?
That's how I got you on the show.
Like, why are you talking to this guy? I can't help myself. I just, I see a guy who's clearly in need of some kind of support, and I can't help but step
obviously. Now,
I think learning to say no is a really good thing. In fact, I read something really interesting in about Steve Jobs years ago, which was that he never stayed in a job for more than a week if he didn't like it. And I think generally, I try and kind of remember that. And sometimes you don't need to know what you want. You just need to know what you don't want, and know that you should say no to things that you don't want, and have faith that ultimately that's going to lead you towards the thing that you did want, even if you didn't know what it was.
Very good answer. Now, what are 3 of your favorite films of all time?
My number one. These are not filmmakers' films. I'm just going to say this now.
Fine, it's fine.
I'm not going to come up with some
Citizen Kane, 400 Blows, The Godfather.
No.
Got it.
Do you know what? I'm just going to be pure entertainment.
Sure.
I love Wedding Crashers. It's one of my favorite films.
It's a good film. It's a fun film.
What else? My favorite film is a film which, for some reason, has now completely gone out of my brain. Sideways. There we go.
Oh,
for some reason, Sideways is a really underappreciated film. I think it's some of the best writing, some of the best acting.
Alexander Payne. Sure.
Fantastic film. And I think Whiplash has to be in my top 3 as well. I do really, really like that film.
It's intense.
But the thing is, if you think about it too long, you quite quickly come up a list of about 100 films that are in your top.
Of course.
But those are 3 that come to mind.
Very cool. And now, where can people find you online?
So, I run 2 businesses. So, from a film production side of view, and for me as a colorist, that all goes through Korro Films, which is korrofilms.com.
Mm-hmm.
Korro is spelt in a really stupid way, just to make it harder for people to find me online.
Sure, it's fantastic marketing. Fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's KORRO. It means nothing. It's a made-up word.
It's gibberish. It's absolute gibberish.
It really is, and so I thought that would be a great thing to use for a business. And so, Korro,
you are. I mean, you are the poster child for high end marketing. I got to say,
I am. I really am. Business development is my middle name. So korrofilms.com is the film production company, and korroacademy.com is the film school. We've recently launched an 8-week film academy, which is very novel. It's basically every course I've ever taught and everything that lives in my brain about filmmaking rammed down your throat over every day, 5 days a week for 8 weeks. And
that's a lot.
Yeah, and it's basically meant to be a 3-year degree in 8 weeks, nice. And it's followed up with a 3-month mentorship scheme immediately afterwards. And it's meant to be my kind of 2 fingers up to higher education, particularly in this country, and the fact that I don't know what it's like in the States, but in the UK at the moment, if you go to film school, if you go and do a 3-year degree anywhere, you're coming out with minimum, £30,000-40,000 worth of debt, which is like
that's nothing. That's nothing here.
I think it's a lot worse there, isn't it?
Oh my God, you're talking about $60,000 to $100,000. So that's probably like £80,000.
The thing is, in this country, that model we've adopted, but it's only relatively new. So, like, even when I went to university, which was only 18 years ago, I left with, I think it was just over £10,000 worth of.
It's exactly how much I left with. Yeah.
Yeah, which at the time was like, felt like loads,
Right.
But these days it just keeps going up and up and up. But I was one of the first people that went to university when you had to pay, but literally like end of the 90s and all of before that, it was all grant-based system, and so it didn't cost you anything to go to university. So it's basically my kind of response to that was, basically fuck that. Let's just cram that information into your head. You can take it, and if you can't, then go and do another course. But it's a kind of a unapologetic film school in 8 weeks course. But we also do 2 and 3 day courses, certified Blackmagic courses for Resolve, which you take an exam at the end and you can become a Blackmagic certified professional user. So yeah, we do quite a lot.
Very cool, man. Well, man, Ollie, thank you so much. It has been an absolute pleasure geeking out with you about color and all sorts of things. And arguably one of the greatest stories of missed opportunity I've ever heard in my life, which I will now recite anytime I speak publicly.
Tell it to your grandkids. Yeah.
Ollie, thanks again, man. I appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thanks so much.
This is what happens when you get two post guys in a room together. We just start talking and talking and talking. But listen, I hope you guys got a lot out of that episode. Ollie dropped some really great knowledge bombs on the tribe today. And I just wanted you, I hope if you listen to this episode all the way, that you understand the power of color and how to now incorporate color on set, in pre-production, and also in color grading to really make your films and projects stand apart. Now, if you want to link to the course that Ollie created called Directing Color, just head over to the show notes at indiefilmhustle.com/246. And MZ, who is the author of the course as well with Ollie, is having a sale these next few days. So definitely take advantage and head over there ASAP. And if you've not already, please head over to filmmakingpodcast.com and leave a 5-star review for the show. It really helps us out in the rankings and helps us get to more filmmakers. So thank you again so much for listening, guys. And as always, keep that hustle going. Keep that dream alive, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Indie Film Hustle podcast at indiefilmhustle.com. That's INDIEFILMHUSTLE.com.